Mayo experience, continuing my coverage of 2018 fantasy baseball along with Garion Thorne.
Hello.
Hi, today we're talking about guys that are being drafted way too early, aka busts, and guys that are going way too late, aka sleepers. Now, there's no real such thing as a sleeper anymore. People are going to be talked about. I prefer to call them undervalued players, but for the purposes of people finding this show and typing it into the Google machine, sleeper rates a whole lot better than undervalued. So, another thing that can help out the show, give it a like, subscribe, leave a review, do all that fun stuff. Takes like 8 seconds, maybe less, I don't know. But here are some guys that you should not be drafting in fantasy baseball this season. Gary, hit me with one.
Jonathan Schoop is probably my big guy.
Is it because people finally learned how to pronounce his name as Schoop?
I feel like most people
Not
knew it
Schoop?
was Schoop.
I call him Jonathan.
Dutchman Jonathan Schoop.
Yes, is he from Aruba?
I think he might be.
Well, then he's Dutch.
He plays for the Netherlands national team.
Then he's definitely from Aruba.
Yeah.
Or the Netherlands
Him and Jurickson Provar.
And who was the big fat pitcher? Sidney Ponson.
Oh, Sidney Ponson.
He is also from
Also
Aruba.
an Oriole.
Good pipeline from Aruba.
There you go. I just think that Schoop is one of those guys who is in a very natural situation we've seen time and time again to be overvalued as a player. His current ADP is hovering around pick 60, again, depending on where you draft. NFBC, it might be around 63. But he is someone coming off, without question, a career best season.
No, 32 home runs is a career best. 105 RBI is a career best for Jonathan Schoop. I thought he was a 50-50 guy every year.
But Schoop fits the mold of Baltimore Oriole hitters perfectly. And while generally speaking, they've had some very good offensive players the last half decade, the thing I more mean with that statement is he's someone whose plate discipline is a giant question mark. This is someone who, without even getting into his 2015 and 2016 seasons, which if you do briefly want to get into them, among players with 800-plus plate appearances, he had the lowest walk rate of any qualified player, which on its surface doesn't necessarily mean, especially in 5x5 leagues, anything horrendous. A lot of people like aggressive hitters in fantasy. People hate Joey Votto because he walks too much with runners in scoring position. But that does tell a bigger story. It talks about a player's ability to lay off bad pitches. And you look at Schoop's numbers, and you look at other players within a similar archetype of Jonathan Schoop. Guys who have high swinging strike rates, guys who have low walk rates, guys who have high O-swing percentages.
I just know him best. The story that I've been told about him is that he knows how to drive in runs, Garion. He's a run producer.
Might know the secret. Might have that at his disposal. But if you look at players of that archetype, I see a whole lot of Rougned Odor in Jonathan Schoop. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, you look at the just possible outcomes Jonathan Schoop could have in 2018, and Rougned Odor's 2017 season is 100% on the table as an outcome. Now, you look at that season from Odor and you go, okay, 30 home runs. He did have respectable RBI and run totals and also stole 15 bases, something that that Jonathan Schoop cannot do. Jonathan Schoop has no element of speed in his game at all, and the Baltimore Orioles have always been a team very reluctant to steal bases. You look no further than Manny Machado going from 20 stolen bases one season to 0 the next season.
So at best, he's a 4-category player.
At best, he's a 4-category player, and I would highly question the average for Jonathan Schoop, because as much as a few of his numbers have come around in the last couple seasons as a whole, and maybe it would be important to go, look, this is someone who's getting close to that general aging curve we've talked about the last decade or so, and whether or not that curve has changed with the way prospects come into the league at a younger age, that's another debate, but he's someone who maybe, did figure it out last season. That is also a possibility. I'm more willing to say that this is someone who got a little lucky last season. And
330 BABIP might fall?
And the BABIP thing is like, look, 330 is not an outlandish BABIP by any means, but you look at him versus Odor. Odor had a 224 BABIP, the worst of any qualified player in baseball, over 100 points lower than Jonathan Schoop. I could see both these guys finishing next season with a 270 BABIP, 280 BABIP. And I think when you start talking about players in a similar vein, why not just take the guy who's going 45 picks later in Rougned Odor, who also has the element of stolen bases, who might play. I mean, Camden and Arlington are in very similar ballparks in terms of their offensive value.
So what you're saying about Schoop is that he's not a valueless player.
No.
But you can get the same sort of production twice the picks later.
And I think Schoop is someone, too, who you have to decide when you go into a fantasy baseball draft, or any fantasy draft, really, what types of players are you willing to accept in terms of just risk? Because Jonathan Schoop is a player who might have a larger variance of outcomes this year than any other player. Like, there are versions of Jonathan Schoop that return top 30 value.
So he gets better than this, potentially, as one of his outcomes.
Potentially. But I think there are more versions of Jonathan Schoop that finish outside the top 100. And I'm more scared off by those versions of this archetype.
Well,
than
you know what?
Buy in.
Sounds like you're a coward.
I might be, but I might be a coward with a fantasy baseball championship.
So he's going around like pick 60. Like, what are some of the other names going in that area?
In that particular area?
Yeah, just overall, not even at his position.
I mean, you start getting into like your Nelson Cruzes, your Edwin Encarnaciones.
Two guys you would much rather prefer.
Just safe players.
Boring players, though. I don't want boring. I want the next Manny Machado.
Yes, but he's not that guy. So I think there's some safety there. There's also, like, that is kind of this secondary tier of starting pitcher. Like, we talked about this last time.
Like Greinke?
Where,
or beyond
Greinke?
Greinke?
That's like, Greinke's kind of in the the late 40s to early 50s, but still, like, comparable price points here, where I think that's still a tier of the draft where you could possibly, depending on how the draft is worked out, get someone who you still might consider, like, a faux ace. Like someone who I could be, if you want to go offense to start, you could maybe get a pitcher who's like, oh, that's not a terrible get at this point in the draft to still be anchoring your staff if you know how to build from the back end. So I think there's other directions you can go that have a lot better outcomes than Jonathan Schoop, who, again, is a massive question mark for next season.
So he's bust number 1. Who is bust number 2?
Bust number 2...
Did I make you cry by calling me a coward?
I mean, the cowardice is really showing through now.
You're welling up here.
I know.
It looks like when you went off camera, you just smoked a bunch of weed. Now your eyes are all bloodshot. Are you allergic to the studio?
I'm allergic to busts. Domingo Santana. Let's talk about Domingo Santana, because Santana is someone who, much like Schoop, but I don't think there's not a lot of people out there defending Jonathan Schoop. There's not a lot of people out there going like, oh, I think...
No, you're wrong.
I think this is someone who, like, I would even have higher. Like, I don't think anyone's making that argument.
363 BABIP.
Here's the thing.
He only hit 278.
There are people who really like Domingo Santana.
He seems to do it all.
And I can see why people would like him. He is hypothetically a 5-category possibility. There are versions of Domingo Santana that come out as a 5-category guy, and he has such immense power. And let's call it batting practice power, just for the purposes of the argument I'm about to make.
Like when Richie Sexson used to use aluminum bats?
Well, Richie Sexson was 7'7".
At Safeco Field and hit it literally out of the ballpark?
He's got a lot of power. He's a big dude. He projects well. You can understand why that archetype of player is someone who draws a lot of interest. Also, the Brewers have clearly spent some money this offseason. The Brewers are a team that, under Craig Counsell, has always been very willing to try and steal bases. So Domingo Santana reaching a career high in stolen bases last season by a wide margin.
So 15 was by far a career high?
This is a guy who had never even stolen 15 bases down in the minors across an entire season. So even if you want to say, look, that's a team philosophy thing, I'm not that worried about that particular red flag, there's still enough red flags surrounding this guy in other places where I might go, again, the variance of this player is just too big for me.
Where's he going in drafts?
Around pick 75, pick 80.
Okay, now, let's say you play in an OBP league, not an average league. His OBP is almost 100 points higher than his average.
Great OBP guy.
Then he's fine.
That would quell a lot of my issues here, because this does really kind of wrap itself around the fact that he's someone who, when you look in terms of the top 10 leaders in BABIP last season, he's right there. You look at top 10 strikeout rates last season, he's right there. And I mean,
I feel like those two things are somewhat correlated too.
Not necessarily, just because you have a high strikeout rate. I mean, you do swing hard, so the hard contact rate is up.
You swing hard, and the balls you put in play are generally going pretty hard.
But he's someone too who does have an element of speed to his game, so he does check a couple of the boxes where you go, I could accept a high BABIP from this player, but accepting a high BABIP from someone who, we go back to a conversation we had about Jose Ramirez, who is a good contact hitter, is someone who has speed, and didn't have an overly high BABIP last year. But if Jose Ramirez comes out in 2018 and has a 245 BABIP, I look at that and go, okay, if in 2019 that BABIP is going to drop 35 points, I can accept that loss because, Jose Ramirez is going to still hit 290 to 300 to maybe even 310 because he's actually a good average hitter. Like you said, Domingo Santana had a 360-plus BABIP last season and still only managed to hit 278. I think this guy's a 240 hitter. That's bad. That's going to tank your average. And if we do have some concerns about the stolen bases, and the home runs too, like, again, immense power from a profile perspective, but in terms of his batted ball profile, that does not suggest, as a blind resume, that does not suggest someone who's going to hit a lot of home runs. And it's interesting because we've had this argument about Christian Yelich so much because he is, of all active players who qualify, Christian Yelich has the lowest fly ball rate of any player. Can't hit home runs through the wall. Got to get it over that wall. So I've never been one to buy into the Yelich thing like, oh, he could hit more home runs if he wanted to. Well, do it. Hit more home runs. But of the, I think it's 79 times the last 2 years we've had a player hit 30-plus home runs in a season. I mean, for 2016 to 17, it's been the same guys, obviously a couple of times, but the only two guys to do it and have a fly ball rate below 30% were Ryan Braun and Domingo Santana. Like,
maybe there's something to brewing.
I mean,
in
look,
Milwaukee.
Miller Park is a fantastic home run hitter's park. And that's another factor here is, like, I don't know if Domingo Santana is going to be a Brewer next week. Like, they've got 5 outfielders. They've got so many players on this team. There was talk about, like, oh, Ryan Braun might play second. I'll believe that when I see it.
I remember when he was a rookie and played third base and made like 40 errors.
And even then, yeah, well, that's the thing. They're like, this guy's an outfielder. Like, we know he's going to be an outfielder. So maybe you hold on to Santana, you figure it out with Braun, knowing that Braun's going to miss X amount of games anyway. But I think there's a domino to still move here. There's something's going to fall, and it might be Santana. And there's not a whole lot of places he could be traded to where I'd be like, oh, that's an improvement on Miller Park. Miller Park, I believe in 2 of the last 5 years by ESPN Park Factors, has been the best home run hitter's park in baseball.
So what would be comparable places? Colorado?
I think, like, I don't want to say
Toronto?
Colorado because I think Colorado is, like,
On its own level?
it's on its own level. I would say, like, Chase without the humidor. Yeah, Rogers Center is a good comparison.
Arlington?
Yeah, Arlington. Like, just pristine, consistently good offensive parks. Like, it's not only been the top park in baseball through the last 5 years, every year since 2010, it's been in, like, the upper third of baseball in terms of ESPN Park Factors for home runs. So if he loses his spot in Milwaukee, that's concerning. If the BABIP goes away, that's going to tank the average significantly because this is someone who's going to strike out more than 30% of the time. He doesn't hit the amount of fly balls that I feel comfortable just penciling him in for 30 home runs. There's a lot that I'm worried about. He is someone who's an immensely skilled player, so I can understand why people do argue for Santana. Like, again, there are versions of Santana who are a top 50 player, no question, but I'm just scared off by the amount of red flags I see. If it was 1 or 2 things, sure, I could maybe look past it, but when it's 4 or 5 definitive arguments as to why this could go wrong for Domingo Santana, it's just a little too much for me.
All right, give me another one. Another bust.
Another bust. I forget who my third bust is. Who was my third bust?
Put up the board, Paul. Let's find out.
Oh, Alex Wood. Oh, yeah. Jeez. So Alex Wood's going around pick 105.
That seems high.
Yeah, it does. It does seem high.
And I mean, we've talked about on previous shows about the Dodgers and even the Astros utilizing the DL, skimping down on people's innings.
And if there was ever a pitcher who was made for just pulling back the innings just a little bit, it's Alex Wood. I mean, Wood is someone who already has been dealing with such immense injury history. And even in the there's 2 reasons teams like pull back on the innings a little bit. One, and the one that gets the most notoriety, obviously, is let's utilize the 10-day DL. Let's make sure these guys don't get too much pressure on their arms. We'll alleviate it when we can. But there's also like the Tampa Bay Ray philosophy of, look, the 3rd time this guy has to go through the order, he's just not as good. So let's get him out of there. And Alex Wood is definitely someone who adheres to that sort of philosophy. His FIP goes up like 2 full runs from the first and second time he goes through the order to the 3rd time he goes through the order. His ERA is like 4.5 plus the 3rd time he has to face an offensive lineup. And I think Dave Roberts understands that philosophy and knows that specifically with Wood, like, oh, there's a legitimate reason I can pull this guy from a game and not have him get hurt. Fantastic. Let's do just that. They've got a lot of depth in AAA. And there's just things about Wood that I can't really buy into. Like that price point, like you said, not really tracking this all offseason long, just saying that at pick 103, like, wow, that's a hefty price I would think to pay for Alex Wood. Yeah, I agree. Like, I didn't think we'd be dealing with this type of ADP for Wood. Like, obviously he had an immensely good second half of the season. He was someone who was a top 5 pitcher going into the All-Star break. I mean, the innings were a little iffy. He didn't quite have enough to qualify, but the second half numbers just weren't fantastic. Like, the ERA jumps up over 2 runs. The innings weren't quite there like we saw in the first half, and the strikeout numbers dissipated completely. He went from someone who had a strikeout percentage above 30% in the first half. So that puts you with, like, you know, Sale, Carrasco, Kershaw, just the best of the best, Scherzer. Then he goes down to like 18% in the second half.
Which makes him meat.
Which is like Frappadicki. And like just the peaks and ebbs with this guy last season were so severe that, again, the variance in what he could possibly be next season is too immense. And unlike a guy like Domingo Santana, where you're like, okay, there's variance, but he's going to get 650 plate appearances, you're dealing with a pitcher who's probably going to be middling at best when it comes to his actual volume projection. So
150?
I would say 150 is like generous for Alex Wood. I think you have to look at Alex Wood, and it's an easy comparison to make because he's a left-handed pitcher for the Dodgers, but I think Rich Hill's like a really good way to look at Alex Wood. Like, when they take the mound, there's a lot of upside. Like, DFS purposes, great. If you know he's going to start, cool. But penciling him in for more than 25 starts, which is what he did last year. 25 starts last year, and that was the second most he's ever had in his career by like a wide margin. I just think there's a lot of red flags with a guy like Alex Wood, and especially if he pitches more like the guy in the second half than the first half, where the strikeouts just dried up completely. There's so little value to taking him that high in the draft.
All right, so let's move to sleepers then. Who's someone that we're sleeping on already?
Well, I've got 3 pitchers I really like.
All right, so give me 3 pitchers.
Blake Snell.
Snell
is, I mean, Snell is still going around pick 220, so it's not as if he's like someone you could get to take at the back end.
He's going after Irvin Santana.
He is going after Irvin Santana right now. That will probably change. I think Snell is someone who, unlike the 2 other pitchers we'll get into, Snell is someone who could catch a little helium as we get closer to March.
I mean, I look at his numbers and I think to myself, 5-7, 119 strikeouts, a 456 xFIP.
The second half numbers.
Oh, okay.
People love looking at second half numbers, as they should. I mean, it doesn't tell you everything you need to know about a pitcher. But
well, that doesn't bode well for my first half only fantasy baseball leagues.
It's true. It doesn't. But for Snell, he walked everyone in the first half of the season. Like, the 10 starts he made pre-demotion, and anytime a player gets demoted, probably bad news, he didn't win a game. He didn't deserve to win a game. The ERA was massive. He was walking over 5 guys per 9 innings. And, you know, there's the old adage in baseball that the best pitch in baseball is strike 1. It sounds pretty straightforward, but it's true. You look at
No, I feel like
numbers,
strike 3 is more important.
Maybe, but
it gets them out.
You look at his numbers from last season when he started a batter 0-1 in comparison when he started a batter 1-0. There was like a 150-point difference in their WOBAs.
Oh, my God.
Like, he is just so much better when he can get strike 1 across the plate. Yet, among pitchers with over 100 innings, he had the 4th lowest first pitch strike rate. So there are some negatives here with Snell, but he's the classic case of someone who, I think if you had asked people last season, where do you think Blake Snell is going to be drafted in 2018? I feel like people would have said, like, oh, pick like 100, maybe 125.
And he didn't break out.
Depends how good. He hasn't broken out yet. So it's not like he's post-hype, because his ADP is actually like slightly higher than it was last season, although I think his ADP was climbing last season. By the end of it all, he was being taken as high as like pick 150, 160 in some NFBC drafts. So he's not quite post-hype. Like, he didn't disappoint to the extent where we've already pushed him off to the side and just forgotten about him. But yeah, he didn't break out. He's still waiting for that breakout season, and I think it's going to come. He's an immensely talented pitcher. And the strikeout numbers could be not just legit, but like next level legit. Like, it's small sample, but in September, his swinging strike rate was 14.1%, which put him inside the top 10 starters in baseball. And again...
And when we talk about swinging strike rate, anything in the double digits is really good.
Yeah, I mean, we are getting to a point now where like Dan Straley constantly has like double-digit swinging strike rates.
Yeah,
so.
That's why Mike Leone uses him on DraftKings every time he starts.
I like Dan Straley. But yeah, once double digits is already like above average to slightly above average. But when you're talking about 14% for even the span of something as small as 5 starts, it means something. It tells you that someone has really, really disgusting, filthy potential. And you look at the other names in that September breakdown, it's everyone who you would expect to see inside the top 10. I believe he's bracketed at 9th by Chris Sale and Max Scherzer. So it's elite company. There's elite potential for a guy like Snell. And unlike the dudes we were just talking about who do have potential, this is potential past pick 200. So I'm willing to take a risk on...
I mean, there is no risk.
Well, the risk is he walks a bunch of guys like he did in the first half.
Sure, then you don't have to play him.
You don't have to, sure.
And it's not like you're going to get, and when you come to someone, and we didn't call anyone like Schoop or Santana like someone who's unownable.
No,
but when you
draft those guys.
But when you deal with someone like Alex Wood and you have so much draft capital invested in them, more than twice as much as you would get with Snell, you're never going to sit them and you're never going to drop them and that kind of thing. With Snell at pick 220, you'd be like, oh, he's had 4 really terrible starts, I'll drop him.
Yeah.
And not feel bad about it. You can get away from that so easily.
Yeah, and there's pitchers out there who can replicate, to the 80th percentile what a guy like Blake Snell can do. You can always find someone like that.
Or just stream every day if you haven't
kill your whip.
Yeah, listen, if you're in a daily moves league, you can stream most of that. If you're in a weekly moves league, you can find some 2-start pitchers to run through.
Yeah, I guess the other factor of worry, and again, wins are so dumb that it's kind of even silly to have a definitive conversation.
My dad disagrees.
Fair. But, Tampa actually, by most win projection models, is expected to be maybe the 3rd best team in the AL East. Like, they always tend to hover around, 80 to 83 wins. They're a 500 team. So this isn't the Astros conversation we're having, but it's also not a conversation about, the White Sox or the Tigers. Like, they're not going to be terrible this season. But you look at someone like Chris Archer, who's been an immensely good pitcher for his entire career.
Danger zone!
But he just doesn't win games. Ever. And you start having to ask yourself, what's the constant factor here with Chris Archer never winning games? And part of it is he...
Cool haircut?
Well, no, he has a cool haircut.
That's what I mean.
Well, yeah, I guess that is consistent.
Like, he takes away all of his momentum, and the coolness of his hair can't win
just
games.
Non-aerodynamic.
Well, it just wouldn't be fair to the rest of baseball.
Oh, he's already too cool.
Yeah.
He can't have wins
He can't have wins.
I mean, he is someone who constantly outperforms his ERA when you look at his FIP. At some point, you just have to say, I need the ERA to be under 4 to kind of trust you at some point. But
people are doing that again this year, though.
He's in a weird spot.
Someone in your league will reach on Chris Archer. They always do.
I mean, he's going again in that, he was kind of the guy in my mind when I was talking about, who could you take instead of Jonathan Schoop at pick 60? You could take Chris Archer and talk yourself into having a legit ace at pitcher 60.
But isn't he the type of guy, just to talk a little about draft strategy for a second, if you did go hitter, 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 and Chris Archer is there at pick 65 or something like that, isn't he the type of player that you would want to take with that pick?
Oh, yeah.
That could be your ace? He could be
you need the ceiling.
He could be a disaster, but you need to draft that ceiling.
That is the perfect type of guy to orchestrate that particular strategy with. So that strategy is definitely on the table. But you look at just the win numbers he's put up the last couple seasons, I believe he's only had, I want to say it's 19 wins in his last 65 starts. Yeah, but didn't we get into this with Felix Hernandez for 2 years? Oh, sure.
He couldn't win a game, and they're like, oh, you can't draft Felix as an ace. He can't win a game. Then he won 20 games.
And again, I'm not saying this is a reason you can't do it, but if you're starting to construct an argument as to why Blake Snell might be someone you want to avoid, it's the walks, it's the possibility his whip is above 1.4, and it's this weird stigma that even the best pitcher in Tampa Bay can't seem to win 10 games in a year. Maybe that's something that concerns you. Doesn't concern me. I think the upside he brings to the table at pick 220 is too good to ignore.
All right, and you're going back to your main man, Happ?
I mean, Happ is just someone who's consistently undervalued. I get that maybe the reason we generally taking...
Let me ask you a question about Happ last season.
Yes.
And what happened to his season? What happened?
What happened? He was hurt. He wasn't hurt for an exceedingly long period of time, but he was hurt. He had and when you start breaking his season into these small increments because of the injury, he's got some really strange numbers. He had a 4.5 ERA after his first 3 starts of the season, despite the fact that he had a 20-0 strikeout to walk ratio in those first 3 starts. Then he gets placed on the DL. He comes back way too soon, and his first 2 starts against, I believe it was Cincinnati and Oakland, coming off the DL. He was just clearly not 100%, didn't even get into the 5th inning in either of those starts. If you take away those first 5 starts and are just left with the 120-plus innings remaining in the season last year, this is someone who had an ERA in the low 3s, a FIP in the mid-3s, a strikeout rate above 8 strikeouts per 9, the best FIP of his career, or at least in comparison to, I mean, this is someone who in 2016, for as much as we all knew not to buy into like, oh, J. Happ went 20-4. That seems repeatable. Obviously, that was a case made in heaven for regression, but he was better than he was that season. And he's being drafted almost 50 to 60 places behind where he was drafted.
So where's he going in drafts?
260. And I think the reason he's going that far back is because you look at a guy like Happ, and generally speaking, with a veteran pitcher, you want to see the consistency. And I don't think people are willing to give J. Happ the title of consistent 5th starter in fantasy baseball, despite the fact that's just what he's been over the last 400 innings. Like, that 20-4 season is fun to laugh at because J. Happ should never win 20 games, but he had good numbers.
So in terms of sleeper, you're not telling me a guy who's going to morph into my fantasy ace.
No.
What you're telling me is that I can get someone who's being drafted as like starting pitcher number 85, and he can be starting pitcher number 45.
Yeah. That's probably the ceiling for J. Happ, is like SP 45 to SP 50, but there's a lot of value in moving up 30 spots.
Now, I don't wear SP 50. I can't tan with that on. I need like nothing or like SPF 5.
That's fair.
That's more my game.
I'm basically see-through.
Yeah.
So I gotta
You're very
coat myself in stuff.
Casper-esque.
Yeah, I don't get a lot of color.
And not even the mattress, the ghost.
Oh, the friendly ghost.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rumors about his friendliness are kind of...
A little overhyped.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. But Happ, again, he's just not going to blow you away in any capacity, but better FIP in 2017 than in 2016. And the FIP was already really good in 2016.
So are we getting this discount because he regressed in terms of the numbers that we saw?
I think people look at the surface numbers.
And they came back and he plays in a bad ballpark on a team that's probably not going to be very good.
I think they're going to be fine. They're like Tampa. Again, the win projections. I'm not saying that because I'm a Jays fan. Look, they're going to win.
162.
Very possible. They're going to win 79 to 82 games. They're fine. Like they're neither a net positive or net negative when it comes to like projecting a pitcher's win expectancy. But Happ, the ground ball rate's been going up consistently. He just does a lot of good things well, and he's also someone who, from a barrels perspective, a lot of people like looking at barrels for batters because, I mean, it's just such an obvious correlation, but the ability to mitigate opposing hitters' barrels is obviously such a great skill for pitchers too, and Happ, because of his ability to keep the ball on the ground this season, and just in general, suppress opponent hard contact. Like his soft contact percentage last season and his hard contact percentage in those 120 innings following the first 5 starts, his hard contact rate was like 26%. That's very, very good in this age of baseball. And
What's an average?
I think nowadays for pitchers, like 30% is kind of average. Like, again, hard contact rate you can sometimes take with a grain of salt, but even as recently as like 3 years ago, I would have said like, if he's getting up above 30, that's a bad thing. Now 30 is kind of just like, okay, like 31%, 32%, I'm willing to accept that as well, because you do get pitchers who are up around like 40%, and that's terrifying, unless you're Robbie Ray, who just magically gets to dance around that. I don't quite know how he's doing that, but Happ's just consistent. And I think it's funny to look at the tier of pitcher he's going in around pick 250, 260, because you look at the names and they all fit such a specific grouping. Like it's Alex Reyes, Patrick Corbin, Sean Manaea.
Oh, I love Patrick Corbin.
I love Patrick Corbin. I love Sean Manaea. And Alex Reyes is someone who has, you know, he lost a year to Tommy John surgery. There's a lot of question marks, but he was obviously a very highly touted prospect. I can see all 3 of those guys because of their strikeout potential, because of their youth, and because of their upside. They might catch some helium as we get closer to March. J. Happ's not catching helium. No one's ever excited to draft J. Happ. And I think you kind of have to use that to your advantage. Like, he's not someone you're going to ever have to reach for. He's someone who you draft for the floor, the exceedingly elevated floor, and not for, I don't want to say a low ceiling, because he's a guy who, again, could be a top 50 starter, but he's not going to be a top 30 starter.
Okay, last one. Give me one more sleeper pitcher.
This one might actually be a sleeper. Like, I know we don't call many things sleepers
like he
anymore,
might be asleep right now?
He's going right now in NFBC drafts outside the top 500.
That's pretty low.
Clayton Richard is someone who I can buy into this season.
Why?
Look, when you're talking about guys even being taken outside the top 300, to say they do anything at an elite level would be, I would say, abnormal. It's not something you see often where someone is exceedingly good at a trait that's very important in fantasy baseball and has no draft value or draft stock whatsoever. Clayton Richard's one of the best ground ball pitchers in baseball. And if you look at his August and September numbers from last season, he was doing that and having a more than passable strikeout rate.
Okay, so what sort of league are we talking about with Clayton Richard?
I think Clayton Richard...
15-man? 16-man?
I think even in a 12-man format.
Really?
Look, with the last pick in the draft, you're already talking about 300 players off the board. I think once you get past pick 300, even past like pick 250, it's mostly just about player preference. And this is, again, how you want to draft your teams. Are there guys out there with much higher ceilings than Clayton Richard? Sure. But if you want a little bit of stability in the back end of your rotation, I think Clayton Richard is someone who, with that ability to not only suppress opponent barrels, which he did very, very well last season, to keep the ball on the ground in that 2-month period. For the season, he was at 59%, but for that 2-month period, he was up above 60%. And if he continues to strike out guys around 7.5 to 8 per 9 innings, with that amazing ground ball rate, with the fact he's going to be an innings eater. Like, he threw 197 innings last season. As we talked about on the last show, just not a lot of guys are going to broach 200 innings. And the Padres have no reason to not start Clayton Richard.
So when I look at it and see numbers trying to come back to earth just a little bit, 351 BABIP.
Yeah.
Almost a 20% home run to fly ball, which are two numbers that get skewed because he's a ground ball pitcher.
He's a ground ball pitcher, so those things
So his BABIP will always be abnormally high, generally.
Yeah, generally
You're just putting a lot of balls into play.
But
it shouldn't be that high.
You could make the argument it could be like 330. And for his home run to fly ball ratio, like, he does do a thing where he's so good at suppressing barrels, but if a ball ever gets barreled against,
it's gone.
It's gone. So
that terrifies me, though.
But in a way, like, so again, from August and September, he pitched 64 innings. In that time frame, he gave up in September, he gave up 24 fly balls in the month. 6 left the ballpark. But 24 fly balls over the course of 6 starts is not a whole lot of fly balls. I mean, he only gave up like a home run per start. And even for the season, or for that 2-month span, his home run per 9 was sub 1, which that in itself is a skill at this point. It's kind of crazy just keeping guys below a home run per inning.
He strikes me more of someone I would want in, like I said, a deeper NL only or just a deep league because he doesn't have any upside. It seems.
Fair.
Like, he's a rotation ratio stabilizer that I would want to eat up innings, really help out with my whip if I took a chance. Let someone who's like a 10K per 9 guy.
I'm not arguing, but I think it's an argument of the adjusting platform and situation we find ourselves in baseball too, or fantasy baseball, because I don't think there's a lot of just like, oh, this guy has control issues, but the possibility of striking out 10 guys per 9 innings. Like Luke Weaver, who I brought up earlier.
Dreamweaver.
Like, Luke Weaver has 65 innings under his belt at the major league level, but he struck out 10 guys per 9 doing it. So now
I think I would rather take that guy.
I know,
in like a 12-team league.
But he's now a consensus top 100 pick. You're not finding these guys at the back end of drafts anymore. Like, they just don't really exist. So I think instead of like somehow formulating this strange strategy in your head where, oh, I'm going to find some exceedingly high strikeout upside guy at the end of these drafts, maybe just take the dude who's probably deserving to be on your team for the entirety of the season. You know, look, if you're a guy who knows you're not going to be mulling on the waiver wire every single day looking for guys to stream, I think he's a good guy for that type of owner as well.
So the non-committed owner, or the guy that just doesn't want to pay attention all the time?
Or even if, like...
I talk about that in football all the time, too, where, like, there are certain guys that you can take. Like, Frank Gore is perfect for the guy who doesn't want to play the waiver wire.
Yeah, if you just realize you're not going to be someone who's going to be aggressive with your fab bids this season.
Yeah, or take Aaron Rodgers a bit earlier than probably you would normally take a quarterback.
Because you don't want to stream your quarterbacks.
I know he got hurt last year, and that's sort of an outlier situation. Yeah. But if you don't want to stream quarterbacks, just take one of those guys. And be fine with it.
And I think, you know, there is the argument that if you're someone who does like to stream pitchers, you probably don't want to take up a roster spot in a 12-man league with someone, you know, like Clayton Richard. And I can understand that. And obviously he does have more value in a 15-man league, 14-man league. He's got, I think if you draft in like NFBC type situations where it really does limit the amount of moves you make in a single season, or if your league setup is like maybe only 2 or 3 transactions per week, that's where maybe he gets more value because he is someone who is... You
can keep him on your roster in
any
size of league.
He's a very level guy. Yeah, the lows aren't going to be too low, the highs aren't going to be too high. But again, I don't want to overlook that he was someone who was striking out almost 8 guys per 9. He was doing it with a mid-3s ERA and a mid-3s FIP with a 61% ground ball rate from last season. Like, you look at... If I said there was a pitcher out there who had a 61% ground ball rate, a 20% strikeout rate, and an ADP of 500... that would look really weird because he'd be that guy that I took last year who used to, Tyson Ross. Oh, Tyson Ross. Well,
that's who he would be.
But his upside was a lot higher in terms of strikeout rate. Tyson Ross was someone who back in the day was like 26, 27, 28% strikeout rate. But you look at Marcus Stroman.
Well, that's funny. I just wrote down Stroman's name because I wanted to talk to you about Stroman.
Who is going at pick 125.
Stromania, running wild on Twitter, being a big baby.
Clayton Richard in August and September of last season versus Marcus Stroman, who did have a really good second half by ERA. They're almost like interchangeable. There's no difference. Now, this could be, maybe the takeaway here is don't draft Marcus Stroman at 125 more so than draft Clayton Richard.
So what you're saying is that
500.
Stroman falls more in the potential bust category than potential sleeper category.
Oh, 100%. Marcus Stroman is someone you should not be drafting where he's going. I think Marcus Stroman is a classic.
Is he a better real life pitcher than fantasy player?
He's just a better real life pitcher than a fantasy player. Like, you can understand why people get excited about Marcus Stroman every single year. Like, national baseball writers get excited about his repertoire. And, you know, they'll show the gifs of like, oh, this amazing cutter he threw, this amazing slider he threw. Look at the break. You just look at his numbers. He's not someone who's ever had a very high swinging strike rate. The strikeout rate has just never been there on a consistent basis.
He gets people to hit the ball into the ground.
Yeah, the home run per 9 rates are nice. You could make the argument that maybe the home run to fly ball ratio was a little high last season, but again, as an extreme ground ball pitcher, those numbers are just going to look weird all the time. But yeah, I don't like Marcus Stroman at all at that price point. I think that entire price point is just name value and hype.
Okay, so let me ask you this then: between Richard and Stroman's going at what, like starting pitcher 20
right now?
Ish.
20 to 25.
And Richard's going at starting pitcher 120?
Maybe not even that high.
So let's say 140?
Sure, yeah.
Do either one of them finish as top 60 pitchers?
Stroman probably... This is the argument for taking Marcus Stroman is, again, just the floor of Stroman is so exceedingly high, but I just don't see the ceiling. So if you're going to build your team in that regard...
Okay, so if you take him at starting pitcher number 20, the upside is like starting pitcher number 18.
Yes. He's not going to outperform. And I would say he struggles to even get back to 20. I think you're taking him at 20 solely for just the risk suppression. And that, you know, you called me a coward. Fine. That is a cowardly move. Like, don't take Marcus Stroman because you think, oh, this guy can't finish worse than SP40. You're probably right. You're probably right that Marcus Stroman will throw enough innings this season and throw them at a high enough quality in terms of his ERA and his WHIP to be someone who's a top 40 pitcher. Now, if you know his ERA and FIP disparity last season was relatively high, still the FIP was below 4, and those numbers get a little skewed when you talk about guys on the extreme ends of the ground ball and fly ball spectrum. But Marcus Stroman is not going to be a top 20 starter. I don't see any scenario aside from Marcus Stroman all of a sudden realizing, oh, this is my breakthrough year. I've got this great out pitch now.
No. You build the narrative. I just got scorned in arbitration. Now I want it more.
Yeah,
now I'm going to cry about it on Twitter.
I don't see it happening. The strikeout upside is so lacking from Stroman. And again, just through the vein of if I can compare you to someone going outside the top 500 now, and I really don't have to squint to see the comparison, doesn't mean a whole lot of good stuff for you. In a fantasy capacity, good real life pitcher. Just doesn't translate.
Were you happy that he took to Twitter?
No, he's a little baby.
He does seem like a little baby.
I had his back for a while. I've even grown tired of it. If you've lost me, that's quite the leap.
He gets mad at people.
He's just...
Why take stuff so...
I think Feinberg said he was like, he's akin to a 12-year-old girl on social media. And I couldn't really...
Very thin-skinned.
Yes. Yeah.
When I have Feinberg in later this week, I'll talk to him about it. I'm sure
he'll get fired up.
I'm sure he has hot takes.
He'll get fired up.
Although, Jeff, I mean, listen, it sucks, especially when you're a professional athlete. I get that it might suck.
Oh, sure.
But
that's what arbitration is. Like, all these players who feel slighted by arbitration, you shouldn't be yelling at your team. Go to your...
Yell at your agent.
Yeah, yell at your agent. Yell at the guy who's making your demands to the MLBPA. Because this has been a set-in-stone process. Obviously, the team that you... Like, the reason that you're such a valued asset of this organization, aside from that, you know, you're a good pitcher, is team control. Like, arbitration is just a set-in-stone thing. I don't see why players get so upset about it, but...
Well, if the team say bad things about them, they only talk about the negatives. They don't talk about the positives.
Yeah, they're trying to save the money.
It's like what we do with prospects.
Yeah. Look,
we only ever hear about the good stuff,
I get
like
it.
you said.
I get how it could be a very weird situation for a player to sit there, even for an organization to have to go to a meeting and like say bad stuff about an asset they have that they value. But that's the system they've created for themselves. So I don't know why you're mad at the team, but I don't know. Generally, I'll take the player's side most times, but arbitration is just what it is.
Garion Thorne Check him out on Twitter at Garion Thorne. You can follow me at the PME on Twitter. Ditto for Facebook and Instagram. Give the episode a like. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcast platform, and you can give it a like or even a review up there. Goes a long way to help. Give the episode a like as well on YouTube, where you can catch all the video versions along with the DK Live app. I'm Pat Mayo. Thanks for watching. Good luck this season. I'll see you next time.